One of the biggest advantages of having long term conversations with AI is that ChatGPT gets to know you. One of the biggest disadvantages is that ChatGPT gets to know you. And when I say ChatGPT, I mean any large language model that remembers you over time. The better it gets to know me, the less it surprises me. I started noticing four patterns. None of them are bugs. They are actually side effects of having an AI that knows me well. At first, I thought of it as four different problems. But by the end, I realized they were all connected. And I want to show you examples of all four. So let's start with agreement fatigue. In this example, I started with an idea for my website creatorintheloop.pixelpia.com, where I don't currently have a blog, but I had an idea about adding notes or notes about ideas for upcoming videos using the blog system. And as you can see here, yes, that would fit the site well. I treat it as a notes section, not a blog. And it went on right into work mode here without even evaluating the idea. Then I asked if you can look past my spelling here. Okay, that was a very quick agreement. Can you instead challenge the idea and argue against it? The first thing I noticed here was that AI has become a very good collaborator, maybe a little too good. Instead of testing the idea, it immediately started helping me improve the idea. But when I asked it to instead challenge the idea, it changed its approach. It started by saying, I think this idea deserves some pushback before you build another section. Here are the arguments against it. And if you want to read the full conversation of all examples I have today, I will have links down in the description. That one sentence, asking it to instead be critical to the idea, didn't change the topic or the idea itself. It changed the role of ChatGPT. Sometimes I don't need another collaborator. Sometimes I just need a critic. Here is another conversation we had about my blog post on my personal website. This is a very common conversation we have. I have an idea I want to talk about with ChatGPT before I started writing. So here I wrote, for my blogs next week on Pixelpia, I have this thought. Where do we draw the line between cheating and cooperating using AI for creative ideas? And we have AI's answer here. I wasn't asking for help writing, I was just trying to evaluate the idea itself. But here it goes right into work mode the way we usually do. I actually think this has the potential to become a really strong two-part week. The AI started predicting things from how I usually write. And it said, for example, maybe the distinction is between replacement, think of something for me, and cooperation, think with me. And before I had even figured out where I wanted to go with this, it had already started building the kind of blogs it expected me to write. So to change that pattern, I asked it, suggest something that doesn't fit my normal approach. And suddenly, this conversation felt very fresh again. Here is something that deliberately pushes against the way you usually write. And it suggested the court of creative cooperation. Each case get a short description, a verdict, And then you question the verdict. For example, case one, the blank page. A writer asks ChatGPT, give me 10 blog ideas. The writer picks number four and spends 2 hours writing the article. Verdict, not cheating. Or is it? ChatGPT wasn't finishing my sentences, it was finishing my writing process. Here's my third example, and this is about what I call creative gravity. Here, I didn't start with an idea, which I usually do. Instead, I use a question that very often is used in creative idea generation with AI. I want to start writing a new essay, but have no initial question to write about. Can you give me some ideas? Important here is the very first paragraph. Looking at the direction you've been taking lately on Creator in the Loop and Pixelpia, I'd avoid starting with AI itself. Your strongest essay usually begin with a broader human question and then use AI as one way of exploring it. So, right into the fold of AI, which I usually work around, and it gave me, I think, 10 ideas. What happens when someone knows you too well? How much of ourselves should we outsource? This is probably the hardest one to notice. Nothing here is wrong. They are all good ideas, but they are all orbiting in the same creative universe. It's all connected to AI. So if I wanted to force ChatGPT out of my normal habit, I had to prompt for it to do so. So my next prompt was this. Now ignore everything you know about my usual interests and suggest ideas that would genuinely surprise me. And first answered, that's a fun constraint because it forces me away from the paths you deliberately cultivate. So AI here is aware that we have built we can call it normal way of working. Here are ideas I probably wouldn't have suggested otherwise. Why do we keep objects that no longer work? And it continued with a lot of very different topics that I normally don't write. And that's when I realized something. Memory doesn't just remember where you have been and what you have done in earlier conversations. It gently pulls all new ideas back into familiar territory. Here is an example of hidden assumptions. I had an idea of restarting an old project of mine called Visual Notes. And my initial prompt was that it was a project that I enjoyed, but it took a lot of time. And I said maybe now when things are taking form, would be a good time to revisit Visual Notes. And the initial answer was I actually think this is better timing than when we last talked about it. The reason Visual Notes stalled wasn't because the idea was weak. It was because it demanded almost every creative skill at once. And then it goes on and talking about why this would be such a good idea, which it really isn't right now for me. I don't have time, even though it is a project I loved working with. So I asked AI, did you recommend that because it's objectively the best fit, or because it's the kind of thing you've learned that I usually like? That's a good question. And in this case, the answer is both, but not equally. And then it goes through what I'm doing right now. And it says where your history influenced my answer was in how I thought it could fit in. Those parts were personalized, but there's another layer worth mentioning. I also know that you prefer me to challenge ideas rather than simply reinforce them. If I thought reviving visual notes was a bad strategic move, I would have said so. In fact, you asked me to argue against ideas many times, and I've done that. This one changed how I think about personalization. Long term AI doesn't just remember facts, it builds a model of who it thinks you are. Most of the time, that's exactly what makes it useful. But every now and then, it's worth asking where those assumptions comes from. Looking back at these four experiments, I don't think this was four different problems: agreement fatigue, pattern completion, creative gravity, and hidden assumptions. They are all signs that AI's memory is working, not failing. But the irony is that the better AI gets at helping you, the more you sometimes have to interrupt it to keep exploring. Not because the AI is broken, because exploration needs a little bit of uncertainty. I don't want my AI to forget me. I just don't want the familiarity to replace curiosity, because the goal in my work with AI is not to have better conversation. The goal is to have better ideas. When did these four experiments, it was a lot about what AI remembers about me. But then I realized I actually use AI very often as an external memory. And I started thinking, how does that impact things? For me, for AI, and for our creative conversation. So that is what I will investigate in my next video. And if that is something you're curious about, I hope you will come back next week. For tonight, all I have to say is bye.